She pretended to be dying so her husband would finally show his true face. He signed the divorce papers beside her hospital bed, convinced she had only a few days left to live. What he didn't know was that she wasn't dying at all, and every signature he placed on those papers was leading him toward the biggest mistake of his life. Please stick with me, because this story takes a turn no one in that hospital ever expected. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Bryn Carter had never been loud or demanding. She believed trust was the foundation of a marriage, which was why she ignored the little changes in her husband at first. Gavin Hale had built a successful career as a corporate attorney, but lately his entire world seemed to revolve around pleasing his millionaire CEO, Vivian Cross. Every conversation came back to Vivian's approval, her business, or her expectations. Soon the late nights became routine. Secret phone calls ended the moment Bryn entered the room. Business trips appeared without warning, and Gavin's warmth slowly disappeared. The man who once couldn't wait to come home now barely looked at his wife across the dinner table. Bryn felt the distance growing, but instead of confronting him in anger, she chose patience. She knew accusations without proof would only give Gavin another excuse to lie. If her marriage was truly falling apart, she wanted the whole truth, no matter how painful it might be. Quietly, she began watching, listening, and putting the pieces together. She wasn't looking for revenge yet. She was searching for the truth, unaware that the answers she was about to uncover would change both of their lives forever. Over the next few days, Bryn put the first part of her plan into motion. With the help of her attorney and under strict legal authorization, her doctors agreed to share only the medical information she approved. Gavin was told that she had developed a rare terminal illness with very little time left. The diagnosis sounded devastating, and for a brief moment, he looked like the caring husband she had once fallen in love with. He stayed by her bedside during the first couple of visits, held her hand, and promised they would face everything together. But Bryn wasn't watching his words anymore. She was watching his choices. It didn't take long for the concern to fade. Gavin started leaving the hospital earlier each day, claiming work demanded his attention. His phone buzzed constantly, and every message seemed more important than the woman lying in the hospital bed. When Bryn quietly asked if everything was all right, he forced a smile and blamed the pressure of his job. The truth revealed itself faster than she expected. Vivian Cross began filling the space Gavin was leaving behind. Bryn overheard enough conversations to understand exactly what was happening. Vivian insisted he shouldn't waste his future caring for someone who wasn't going to survive. She reminded him that he still had a successful career ahead of him and deserved a better life. Instead of defending his wife, Gavin listened. Soon, his hospital visits became shorter and less frequent. He spent more evenings at expensive restaurants with Vivian than beside Bryn's bed. Through quiet observation and careful planning, Bryn watched her husband slowly trade loyalty for ambition. The fake diagnosis never caused her real pain. What broke her heart was realizing how quickly the man she trusted was willing to abandon their marriage the moment he believed she had nothing left to offer him. A week later, Gavin walked into Bryn's hospital room carrying a leather folder tucked under his arm. His face wore a carefully practiced expression of concern, but Bryn noticed he couldn't hide the impatience in his eyes. After asking a few routine questions about her health, he pulled a stack of documents from the folder and placed them gently on the bedside table. "I've been meeting with financial advisors," he said in a calm voice. "If the worst happens, these papers will make everything easier. We won't have to leave a mess behind." Bryn slowly reached for the documents, pretending her hands were too weak to hold them steady. She glanced at the first page and immediately recognized what they really were. They weren't financial forms at all. Hidden among legal language were divorce papers that would officially end their marriage before anyone questioned Gavin's next move. She looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, forcing herself to appear devastated. "If you think this is what's best," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. Without another question, she signed every page exactly where Gavin expected. The moment the final signature dried, a quiet sense of relief crossed his face. He thanked her, gathered the documents, and even kissed her forehead before walking out of the room. As the door closed behind him, Bryn watched through the window as he pulled out his phone with a smile she hadn't seen in months. She didn't need to hear the conversation to know who he was calling. In his mind, the hardest part was over. He believed freedom was finally within reach, and he was already imagining a future with Vivian. What Gavin never suspected was that Bryn's attorney had drafted every document with extraordinary care. Hidden within the legal paperwork were protections that secured Bryn's assets and created a clear record of Gavin's deception, setting the stage for everything that would come next. The room fell silent after Gavin left. Bryn waited until the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the hallway before wiping away the tears she had forced herself to shed. The sadness on her face vanished, replaced by calm determination. A few moments later, her attorney stepped into the room carrying another folder. He smiled gently and nodded. Everything went exactly as planned. Bryn took a slow breath. The hardest part had never been pretending to be sick. It had been watching the man she loved reveal who he truly was. There was one truth Gavin had never bothered to discover. Bryn Carter had never been an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. Long before they met, her father had built a respected private investment company from the ground up. When he passed away unexpectedly, Bryn quietly inherited the business. Instead of selling it, she spent years studying finance, expanding its portfolio, and turning it into one of the country's most successful private investment firms. She never appeared in magazines, attended glamorous events, or attached her name to the company. Every major decision was made behind closed doors, allowing her to remain completely anonymous. Even many of her closest business partners had never met her in person. Her personal fortune had quietly grown beyond anything Vivian Cross could imagine. Yet Bryn never measured people by wealth. She drove an ordinary car, lived comfortably instead of extravagantly, and believed genuine love was worth more than expensive possessions. That was why she never talked about her success after marrying Gavin. She wanted a husband who loved her for her character, not her bank account. Looking back, she realized Gavin had never shown any curiosity about her past, her family, or the business her father left behind. He had been so focused on building his own future that he never cared enough to learn who the woman beside him really was. Soon, that mistake would cost him everything. Only a few weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Gavin stopped pretending to grieve. News spread quickly among his co-workers that he and Vivian Cross were engaged. They acted as though their relationship had only recently begun, but Bryn knew the truth. Their future had been planned long before Gavin walked into her hospital room with those papers. Vivian spared no expense. Together they purchased a breathtaking estate overlooking the water, reserved an exclusive wedding venue, and began planning a celebration that would attract influential business leaders from across the country. Every decision reflected the luxurious life they expected to build together. Although Vivian never contacted Bryn directly, she found subtle ways to remind everyone that she had won. Flowers that Gavin once sent to Bryn were now displayed proudly in Vivian's office. Conversations about the upcoming wedding were held openly in places where mutual acquaintances would inevitably carry the news back. Vivian enjoyed believing she had replaced Bryn completely. What neither of them realized was that Bryn had already left the hospital. The moment her plan no longer required the hospital room, she quietly returned to her normal life, healthy and stronger than ever. Each morning became another step toward rebuilding the confidence that betrayal had nearly stolen. She refused to let heartbreak define the rest of her future. At the same time, she turned her attention towards something far more important than revenge. Working closely with her attorney and a trusted team of investigators, Bryn began examining Gavin's professional activities inside Vivian's company. Financial records, legal filings, confidential transactions, and corporate agreements were carefully reviewed. She wasn't searching for rumors or assumptions. Every piece of evidence had to be factual, legal, and impossible to challenge. While Gavin and Vivian celebrated expensive venues, designer invitations, and honeymoon plans, Bryn quietly built a case brick by brick. They believed they were preparing for the happiest day of their lives. In reality, they were walking straight toward a future neither of them could stop. Bryn knew that exposing Gavin would require more than suspicion. If she wanted the truth to stand in court and before every business partner who trusted him, every claim had to be backed by solid evidence. She assembled a small team she had worked with for years, experienced investigators, forensic accountants, corporate attorneys, and compliance specialists who understood exactly how to uncover financial misconduct without crossing legal boundaries. For weeks, they reviewed thousands of documents. Bank records, internal company reports, contract revisions, billing statements, and legal correspondence were examined one file at a time. Slowly, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Several contracts had been altered after clients signed them. Payments had been redirected through unnecessary consulting agreements. Gavin had approved legal shortcuts that favored Vivian's company while putting clients at unnecessary risk. Investigators also discovered that he had shared confidential information from corporate clients to help Vivian gain an advantage during negotiations. Every action violated the professional ethics he had sworn to uphold. Bryn insisted that nothing be rushed. If there was even the smallest doubt about a document or witness, it was set aside until independently verified. She refused to build her case on assumptions or anger. Gavin had betrayed her personally, but this was no longer about a broken marriage. It was about accountability. Each discovery was carefully organized into a detailed legal record, complete with financial analysis, timelines, witness statements, and certified copies of every supporting document. By the time the investigation was complete, the evidence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Meanwhile, Gavin never suspected a thing. He spent his days selecting tailored suits, attending wedding tastings, and celebrating his upcoming marriage with Vivian. Friends congratulated him on his fresh start, and he accepted every compliment with confidence. He believed his past had been left behind inside that hospital room. He had no idea that, while he planned the next chapter of his life, the foundation beneath everything he had built was quietly beginning to crack, one verified document at a time. As the wedding drew closer, Vivian became increasingly focused on protecting her wealth. She wanted every possible advantage before marrying Gavin, convinced that careful financial planning would guarantee their future together. During several private meetings, she urged Gavin to restructure parts of her business empire by transferring valuable company assets into newly created holding companies. The strategy relied on complicated legal loopholes that appeared harmless on paper but carried significant risks if anyone examined the transactions closely. Gavin hesitated at first. As an experienced corporate attorney, he understood how dangerous those decisions could become if regulators or business partners ever questioned them. But Vivian reminded him that he was the company's legal expert and insisted no one would ever discover anything improper. She also assured him that, once they were married, everything they built would belong to both of them. Wanting to prove his loyalty, Gavin approved the transactions and personally supervised the paperwork. He believed every document had been prepared carefully enough to avoid suspicion. Instead, those transfers became the final missing pieces Bryn's team had been searching for. The investigators immediately recognized unusual patterns linking the newly created companies to outstanding loans and financial obligations that Vivian had quietly tried to move out of public view. Every transfer was documented, timestamped, and supported by official records. The evidence strengthened Bryn's case beyond anything she had expected. At the same time, Bryn made her own move through the investment firm she secretly controlled. Without revealing her identity, the company legally purchased several outstanding debt portfolios connected to Vivian's businesses from lenders eager to reduce their exposure. The transactions were completed quietly and entirely within the law. By the time everything was finalized, Bryn held enormous financial leverage over key parts of Vivian's corporate network. Neither Vivian nor Gavin noticed the ownership changes because they assumed the debt had simply been transferred between financial institutions. Confident and distracted by wedding plans, they never imagined the person holding that leverage was the very woman they believed had already disappeared from their lives forever. The wedding day finally arrived, and everything looked exactly the way Gavin and Vivian had imagined. Luxury cars lined the entrance of the waterfront estate while business executives, politicians, and wealthy investors filled the beautifully decorated venue. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, live musicians played softly, and guests admired every extravagant detail. Gavin stood at the altar believing he had left his old life behind and was only minutes away from marrying the woman he thought would secure his future forever. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, the atmosphere suddenly changed. Several attorneys entered the venue carrying official documents. They walked directly toward Vivian and Gavin without hesitation. One attorney calmly handed Vivian a packet of legal notices while another approached Gavin with documents addressed personally to him. Confused whispers spread through the room as guests watched the unexpected interruption. Within minutes, Vivian's phone began ringing repeatedly. Her chief financial officer informed her that several corporate bank accounts had been temporarily frozen pending legal review. At the same time, major investors notified her company that future funding had been suspended until questions surrounding recent financial transactions were resolved. Several important business contracts were terminated immediately under compliance clauses that had just been triggered. Gavin stared at the paperwork in disbelief. As an attorney, he recognized every document, but he couldn't understand how everything had happened at once. He insisted there had to be some mistake and demanded an explanation from the lawyers. Before anyone answered, the large entrance doors opened again. Every conversation in the room came to an immediate stop. Bryn Carter walked inside wearing an elegant navy blue dress, looking completely healthy. There was no sign of the weak woman Gavin had abandoned in a hospital bed. She stood tall with quiet confidence, her smile calm and genuine. For the first time in years, she looked completely at peace. The color drained from Gavin's face. Vivian stared in complete shock, unable to understand how the woman they believed was dying had suddenly appeared at their wedding looking stronger than ever. Bryn walked calmly to the front of the room as every guest watched in stunned silence. Gavin couldn't take his eyes off her. The woman he believed was spending her final days in a hospital now stood before him healthy, composed, and completely in control. Vivian's confident smile disappeared as confusion spread across her face. Bryn looked directly at Gavin before speaking. "I was never terminally ill," she said. "I gave you one opportunity to prove that your vows meant something. Instead, you treated my life like an obstacle standing between you and the future you wanted." The room remained silent. She explained that the diagnosis had been part of a carefully planned legal strategy designed to reveal Gavin's true intentions. No one had forced him to abandon his marriage. No one had convinced him to bring divorce papers into a hospital room. Every decision had been his own. Bryn then nodded toward her legal team. They distributed organized files containing certified records, financial documents, timelines, and evidence collected during months of investigation. The documents detailed Gavin's professional misconduct, including improper handling of confidential client information, questionable legal approvals, and transactions that violated company policies. Every claim was supported by official records. Vivian quickly grabbed one of the files and began reading. Her expression changed with every page. She realized Gavin had hidden critical information from her as well. He had assured her that every business decision was completely legal, yet the evidence showed he had exposed her company to enormous financial and legal risks without telling her the full truth. Guests who had been celebrating only minutes earlier quietly stepped away from the couple. Several investors exchanged concerned looks before leaving the ballroom without saying a word. Business partners who had planned future deals immediately canceled private meetings and ended conversations. The elegant wedding that had been meant to celebrate ambition and success collapsed into public humiliation. Gavin stood speechless, while Vivian realized the man she trusted had deceived not only his wife but also the woman he planned to marry. Bryn never raised her voice or celebrated what was happening. She simply stood quietly while the legal process unfolded exactly as her team had planned. Months of careful preparation were now producing results that no amount of money or influence could stop. She hadn't come to ruin anyone's life out of anger. She had come to let the truth speak for itself. As the attorneys continued explaining the legal notices, Gavin's phone rang again. This time it was a representative from the State Bar Association informing him that a formal investigation into his professional conduct had officially begun. The evidence submitted against him was serious enough to trigger disciplinary proceedings, placing his law license and entire career in jeopardy. Across the room, Vivian received another devastating update. Several lenders had demanded immediate reviews of outstanding financial obligations, while key investors withdrew their support. Companies that had once competed for the chance to work with her now suspended negotiations until every legal issue was resolved. The empire she had spent years building was suddenly facing enormous financial pressure from every direction. Within days, the consequences spread even further. Planned business expansions were cancelled, luxury properties became financial burdens, and expensive purchases no longer seemed like symbols of success. The glamorous future Gavin and Vivian had imagined together disappeared almost overnight, replaced by uncertainty and mounting legal challenges. Gavin finally turned toward Bryn, searching for an explanation, but she met his eyes with quiet calm rather than satisfaction. "I never wanted your money," she said softly. "I wanted your loyalty." Her words carried more weight than any accusation. "You believed wealth could replace commitment. You believed no one would ever discover your choices. But character isn't measured when life is easy. It's revealed when someone believes there will never be consequences." Neither Gavin nor Vivian had an answer. Bryn walked away without another word, leaving them to face the results of their own decisions. She hadn't destroyed their future through revenge. They had done that themselves the moment they chose ambition over honesty and loyalty over personal gain. Months passed, and the storm that had once consumed Bryn's life slowly settled into peace. For the first time in years, she woke each morning without wondering whether someone she loved was hiding another lie. The pain of Gavin's betrayal hadn't disappeared overnight, but it no longer controlled her thoughts. She chose to move forward instead of allowing bitterness to define the rest of her life. With her personal life finally behind her, Bryn devoted her energy to expanding the investment company her father had left in her care. She focused on supporting hardworking entrepreneurs who struggled to secure fair financing from large institutions. Instead of chasing high-profile publicity, she quietly invested in family-owned businesses, helping them grow while protecting local jobs and communities. Bryn also began mentoring young women who dreamed of building careers in finance. She remembered how difficult it had been to earn respect in an industry where people often underestimated her. She shared her experience, encouraged confidence, and reminded them that integrity was far more valuable than quick success. Watching others achieve their goals brought her a sense of purpose she had never expected. Most importantly, she allowed herself to trust again. Not blindly, but wisely. She no longer judged people by promises alone. She paid attention to actions, honesty, and consistency, believing those qualities revealed a person's true character. Meanwhile, life looked very different for Gavin and Vivian. The investigations continued, business opportunities disappeared, and legal expenses mounted. Many of the people who had once celebrated their success quietly distanced themselves when the consequences became public. They spent months trying to repair reputations that had been damaged by their own choices. Looking back, both of them finally understood what they had lost. Their downfall hadn't been caused by Bryn's plan. It had started the moment they allowed greed, ambition, and selfishness to replace honesty and loyalty. Bryn had simply uncovered the truth they worked so hard to hide, while proving that a life built on integrity always stands stronger than one built on deception. Several months later, Bryn found herself standing outside the same hospital where everything had changed. She looked up at the familiar building and smiled quietly. It was strange how a place that had once witnessed so much heartbreak now reminded her of strength instead of pain. She wasn't there because she missed the past. She had simply wanted to close the final chapter of a story that no longer defined her. As she stood near the entrance, memories returned one by one. She remembered pretending to be weak, signing papers with trembling hands, and watching the man she loved walk away believing she had only days left to live. At the time, it had felt like the most painful moment of her life. Now she understood that it had also been the moment she truly discovered who Gavin was. She never pretended to be dying because she wanted to destroy him. She never created the plan out of hatred or a desire for revenge. She only gave him the freedom to make his own choices without knowing he would one day be held accountable for them. Every decision that followed had been his alone. The greatest revenge had never been taking away his career, his reputation, or the future he imagined with Vivian. Those losses came from the consequences of his own actions. Bryn had simply refused to protect him from the truth. Taking one last look at the hospital, she felt a peace that money could never buy. She had survived betrayal without allowing it to change the person she was. She had remained patient when anger would have been easier, and she had trusted that honesty would eventually overcome deception. With a grateful heart, Bryn turned and walked toward the future she had built for herself. She left the hospital with no bitterness, no regret, and no desire to look back again. In the end, she learned that real victory isn't found in revenge. It comes from keeping your dignity, standing by the truth, and letting time reveal every hidden mask.